Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have apparently the second Ordinals thing for you this week, fuckshitcoins.com. This apparently is Ordinals from a Maxi's perspective. We have the moderator, some girl that used to work for Casey, Asher from Consolidated Trading, Arik from Spiral, Lisa from Base 58, and finally SuperTestNet. You guys know SuperTestNet, but this is actually Isabel. Enjoy the panel. Thank you.
Here we go. Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you, Walton. Okay, so without further ado, I'm just gonna really quickly, because I wanna be very conscious of time, would you all just really quickly sort of orient yourselves in terms of your relationship with Ordinals, who you are, why you're here, maybe a little bit about yourself, but super quick, like a minute. Go for it.
My name is Asher Corson. I'm a portfolio manager at a trading firm in Chicago called Consolidated Trading. I've been there for 5 years, and I've been personally trading Bitcoin for 10 years. And I'm an Ordinals bull and an Ordinals investor.
Cool.
I'm Arik. I'm a software engineer at Spiral. I mostly work on Lightning stuff and Rapid Gossip Sync. However, back in February, I inadvertently found myself helping a friend do some inscribing without a full node, and now I just happen to have a little inscription website.
Hey everyone, I'm Lisa, also known as Nifty. I run a Bitcoin protocol school. I really like Ordinals. I also run Bitcoin++. We had the first ever Ordinals workshop at our first ever conference, so we're huge Casey fans, and I'm mostly on the panel to make Walton annoyed. No, I'm kidding.
I'm SuperTestNet. I have done 2 things with inscriptions. I made the first website where you could create inscriptions without needing a full node, and then later I broke them for a day. I found a bug that made it so that all the inscription numbers were off by 1, and then they fixed it. So that's what I'm here for.
All right.
Also, I don't like them. I think they're dumb.
So you guys see that we have a very balanced panel on our hands. I did a lot of work to make sure that we had a balanced panel so that we could really get into the juicy stuff and kind of like break Ordinals down. So we're gonna be talking about Ordinals, just, you know, for the absence of any doubt. Ordinals is a convention for tracking and putting serial numbers on Satoshis that was invented by Casey Rodomore. We're also gonna be talking about inscriptions, which is a separate but related sort of standard for inscribing arbitrary data to the witness of transactions on the blockchain. So we're gonna be talking about both of those things. Just to kind of open this up and sort of ground the conversation, I wanna start by asking each of you, and I think we might just go down the row for a second. In your opinion, what problems do Ordinals solve? And don't worry, we're gonna also ask which problems Ordinals creates. But let's just start with, what problems does Ordinals solve? Why Ordinals?
So inscriptions solve storage. And Ordinals plus inscriptions solve provenance and trading in addition to storage.
Okay.
Yeah, I think inscriptions do actually solve censorship-resistant data storage, which I think could have interesting applications, such as, you know, for example, certificate verification is one thing that I personally like to bring up. I'm not personally sure which problems the Ordinals aspect of the protocol solves, but it is there, I guess.
Yeah, I think, so I've worked in like the digital art industry, like as one of my many careers was working at a digital art startup. And it's definitely like, I think Ordinals definitely solve, like these guys have mentioned, like the provenance problem, like, you know, where did this art come from? Like how much, like who inscribed it? Where did it come from? Like, so now people can prove that they like put art on the chain in a way that I think maybe it existed in other ecosystems, but I think this is like kind of one of the first ones. And like everyone else has kind of already mentioned, knowing where the art is like as a file and being able to like have an assurance that it's pretty much going to be there forever. As long as Bitcoin is around, and Bitcoin's definitely going to be around forever. I don't think people, if you aren't in like the collectible or digital art space, I think it's kind of hard to understand how big and important of an innovation that is. And so, I don't know, I get really excited that it's something that Casey was able to solve using Bitcoin.
I don't think they solved anything. I think that That's not true, actually. I think censorship-resistant file storage was already a solved problem since before Bitcoin even existed. So I don't think ordinals or inscriptions helped solve that. I do like ordinals. The accounting system that Casey came up with for just tracking Satoshis is pretty cool, and it's very efficient, and it doesn't take up any space in the blockchain. So I do like that, and that does help with establishing provenance. So kudos to Casey for coming up with that. But yeah, I think it's a silly place to put the blockchain's a silly place to put files because that was already a solved problem.
Thanks, Super. I like that we have some folks on this stage who like inscriptions and not ordinals, and some who like ordinals and not inscriptions. So just taking note of that. So now we're going to get into something a little bit juicier that I think will probably constitute the majority of this talk, which is what problems do ordinals create? And we're going to definitely dive deeper into that. But I just want to, again, kind of go down the line and ask each of you, from your opinion, what problems do ordinals create? What concerns should we have about ordinals? Again, we'll hope to dive deeper as the talk continues.
Thank you. So my perspective is a little unique. Coming from the professional investing world as an advocate trying to get professional investors and professional traders to trade Bitcoin, I think one of the problems ordinals created, unfortunately, is it attracted the grifters from all the other chains into Bitcoin. And I think what that's done is it's drowned out what I consider to be actual maximalist voices that want to contribute to the conversation about ordinals, that believe in Bitcoin. So I definitely think that's unfortunate. And then the other thing that I think is unfortunate about it is sometimes the way people describe putting data onto a Satoshi, I think it's inaccurate, and I think it's misleading, potentially on purpose. And I just think it's important that we talk about it accurately.
I think there are multiple problems that ordinals have introduced. For once, the UTXO set has ballooned. We are now over 7 gigabytes, which makes verifying transaction spends slower. The blockchain size is also growing at a faster rate. I worry that the combination of the fuller blocks and the larger UTXO set is leading underpowered full nodes to maybe turn off, which may result in diminished decentralization. And the other thing is, although people talk about it theoretically, and I think theoretically it might be an issue, which is that now because you have special Satoshis or inscribed Satoshis, whether or not people may agree with the terminology, that might diminish fungibility. I also think that it is such a small subset of all of the Satoshis that are out there as per Casey's arbitrary tracking mechanism that I don't think it'll actually end up constituting a real problem, though.
I think from a problems perspective, I think the cultural one, like the influx of a new kind of culture of crypto people into Bitcoin has been, I would say, like a little disruptive. Like I think a lot of people who've been in Bitcoin for a long time are like, who are these new people? What are their values? Their values are like, I think to a large extent, like different than mine. And I think that can be a little difficult to deal with. I know I definitely like, you kind of like see people who are like, oh, this is all the cool art stuff and we're making lots of money selling all these like really fancy Bitcoin things that are in Bitcoin now. And it's like, that's not sound money. Like that's not making money a better place. Like I like Bitcoin because it's like a payment rail system, right? Like I work in Lightning because I really care about being able to transact with Bitcoin at scale quickly, So it's like, okay, I have the values that I like about Bitcoin, and I like can see these new crowds coming in and being like, okay, I do not have their values, right? Like, but they're still in Bitcoin. Like, Ordinals is still a protocol ecosystem, so I think that's really interesting. I will point out that I think I kind of want to make one point about like, there's also like kind of, as Arik was talking about, these technological challenges that all this new activity on the chain is kind of, let's say, placing some strain on the ecosystem. Like, so our blocks are full. There's a lot more UTXOs, right? Like, there's a lot more stuff happening on Bitcoin, and it's causing the technology that we've built to kind of have like some, I don't know, let's say scaling problems, if you would say that. I think it's worth pointing out that, like, with all these new people and new interest and use cases for Bitcoin, I think what we're seeing is like what would actually happen if Bitcoin was like being really highly used, right? So like if it wasn't ordinals, if it was like actual transactions happening at the base layer, I think we would be seeing a lot of the same stuff. The UTXO set would be growing, right? Because more people would be self-sovereign, they'd be holding their Bitcoin themselves, which means more UTXOs would be created as every new person comes online, right? And like the perfect Bitcoin adoption scenario, you would be having a ballooning UTXO set, right? You would be having blocks that are full that are going through. You would be seeing like an active fee market where it's expensive to get transactions in. And like, I think it's really easy to be like, okay, these values of the people that are coming and using Bitcoin in this way are like it's just like I don't share their values. And so to some extent, I resent the fact that they're using Bitcoin and making it more expensive or like adding, difficulty to the technology that's required, kind of just making it harder to run a Bitcoin node. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, but all those effects and all those like knock-on effects that they're having are the exact same of what I would hope would happen if Bitcoin like became this like widely adopted protocol, right? So these are problems that we're gonna have to solve, hopefully, like if we do get like a huge, like if everyone who owns Bitcoin owns it themselves, our UTXO set is going to balloon, right? Like everyone's gonna get a UTXO because that's how you hold Bitcoin, is you own a UTXO. So like, yeah, like in the short term, it might be like, oh my gosh, like ordinals are creating all these problems, but it's like, no, the problems that they're creating, at least on like a protocol and technology side, are problems that are good, and they're problems that we as a technologists and protocol developers and designers, this is kind of exciting. We have like an opportunity to figure out how to deal with a chain that looks like this, like full and lots of UTXOs, et cetera. Okay, I've talked a lot.
So I think he hit it on the head and named the real problems that they've introduced. But I want to mention another one, which is beauty. Dusty, you've seen a copy of my blockchain. In the year 2022, my copy of the blockchain was beautiful. It was ordered, it was structured, it was as inspiring as the pyramids and as stunning as the Grand Canyon. It had natural ruts, roots, and bridges that you could just explore, and it was awesome. And then suddenly in the year 2022, Casey comes along with a bucket of monkey paint, and he throws it on my pyramid, and he's like, look, it's art now. And it got ugly. Now when you look at a block explorer, you see these huge growths and legions on my blockchain, and it's nasty and it's horrible, and I just want to go back. Get off my blockchain. Give me back the stunning one.
Thank you, Super, for that insight. So I think this is, we mentioned a lot of things that I want to go into more depth. Can we just sort of chat a little bit, and I might offer this as like a popcorn style question. Do you want to chat a little bit more about what the practical impacts are of a growing UTXO set, right? Like, why does that matter? What's going on there? Why should the average user be concerned about this? What are the impacts of this potentially on decentralization and other things? Who wants to take this one?
I didn't hear the question.
Arik, you should take it.
All right. Man, I was hoping I wouldn't actually need to talk about anything practical, because, but, well, the implications are actually exactly as I was describing. It's just the fact that all of a sudden you need more memory to be able to process new blocks. As you verify incoming transactions, if it exceeds the amount of space that you have in RAM, you have to dump some of it to a disk, and it's just making things more complicated. And however, the thing is though that Nifty actually makes a really great point. These are champagne problems, and that is not something that was really, it hasn't really my perspective prior to this, but like Nifty is absolutely right. We do want people to be able to control their own UTXOs, and ultimately, whether they're using it for weird monkey pictures or for self-sovereignty, it is going to result in a ballooning UTXO set. So really, it is on us protocol developers to figure out how we're just going to deal with this new reality. And one of the nice things, coming from my perspective as a Lightning developer, now there is definitely much more of a fire under my ass to get like protocol changes implemented faster. Obviously, anybody who has ever talked to me knows that review in LDK is hard, but who cares? Just write better code, get things in faster, like lean on people. It is what it is, and we have to solve for it.
That's a great point. I really appreciate sort of bringing up Lightning. I was hoping that this would come up, right? This idea that a lot of the problems that our ordinals are creating are things that theoretically should be solved by Lightning at some point, including, let's just talk about the fee market, right? I think that's a really great opportunity to talk about the fee market in general. Thoughts about ordinals being negative, positive, moderate, in terms of what's going on with the fee market specifically. Obviously, ordinals, and it's increasing fees. Thoughts about that? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that a network, it's pretty obvious, everybody already knows this, a network's value is based on the size of the network, how many people are using it. So from my perspective, I agree, these are really good problems. Having been paying attention to Bitcoin for the amount of time that I have, I'm personally really happy to see full blocks. I think blocks are a scarce asset. And while I'm not interested in having like security budget scaremongering, nobody knows what's going to happen. It's totally unknown. I do think the idea of having more people coming onto the network and paying fees to make sure that we have a security budget, I just don't see how that's bad in any way.
Any other thoughts?
I agree. I think one nice side effect of the growth of the inscriptions market is that it's increased fees for miners and therefore increased usage of the Lightning Network. It's a positive.
Yeah, I think you can see a good example of like one of the impacts that increased fee market, like an increased fee market, the more competitive bidding for block space was the adoption of Lightning really picked up. The biggest example of this that I can think of is Binance. Is my understanding, Binance now supports Lightning withdrawals, and they hadn't before. The ordinals kind of came in, or inscriptions, I should say, came in and really made block space more expensive. So to some extent, like I was saying earlier, like the kinds of problems from a protocol perspective that ordinals is, putting some stress on the Bitcoin core ecosystem. These are the sorts of things that are almost like all the things that Lightning to some extent was proposed to help with when we got to a point when those kinds of problems are happening. So as a Lightning, longtime Lightning core maintainer, it's really exciting to see what kind of challenges Lightning now has because there's an active fee market. So we've had a lot of problems. Like a more active fee market has meant that a lot of Lightning channels started closing because there's a lot of disagreement between Lightning nodes about what the fee rates are. So all of a sudden we've had like kind of new issues popping up in the Lightning network that had been, I would say, almost dormant or like non-exercised sort of like edge cases that started kind of like coming out of this like, new environment that we're operating in. And I don't know, for me, I think that's really great. It's exciting. It's, we've had opportunities to try and fix them now. I don't know, I feel like I'm such an engineer. I like love knowing when there's problems. It's like, oh great, okay, we get to like find out where all the bugs are and we can solve them now. And like, luckily, I'm gonna say luckily, I think the ordinal or the inscription marketplace is like we've sort of seen ebbs and flows in it. So like, something will get really hot and all of a sudden there'll be like this big surge in activity and then it'll kind of like die off again. One of the nice things about that, at least from like building on Lightning perspective, is we get to kind of almost like having a test run of like, okay, here's what a lot of here's what a high fee rate market does to Lightning. We kind of get to learn our lessons, see where the bugs are, and go back to maybe what we have to do on the Lightning protocol, or even just the implementation level to make it such that we're more robust about those kinds of environments going forward. Whereas if it had like surged to that and just stayed, you kind of don't have that period of like sort of like everything goes back to not as serious for a bit. I don't know.
I think it's also worth pointing out that it's had a natural feedback loop on the inscriptions market itself. As fees rose, they stopped putting images mostly on Bitcoin. They're putting them other places now and mostly only using them to store text, which is its own kind of inefficiency, but it's a better inefficiency. It's not as bad, so that's been nice to see. Like the feedback mechanism of fees increasing works.
Other thing I really like talking about, and like, okay, so this like inscriptions and ordinals thing, I think introduced, especially with like this BRC20 protocol, that as an engineer, you look at it and you're like, this is the most idiotic thing I've ever seen. I think like this is not a uncommon opinion about this particular protocol. It's like just really dumb. It's like the like I'm gonna use the word midwit. Don't get mad. It's like the midwit way of doing like on-chain assets. They're just using JSON. They're writing text data that anyone can read. Like you don't have to know a lot of fancy cryptography to understand what's going on. You can just go to a website and like see the data. It's like extremely simple. It's like extremely inefficient. But it's a way that people were able to start getting like what I've started calling extra chain assets, like that aren't Bitcoin accounting into the Bitcoin blockchain. And it's like the first kind of at scale thing we've seen, I think, in Bitcoin. There have been a lot of proposals to do this using different kinds of cryptographic techniques and more efficient ways of storing the data, et cetera. But it's kind of like our first time that we're really seeing a market for extra chain assets and a marketplace and kind of what that looks like. One of my long running theories about these sorts of assets in Bitcoin, like extra chain, like information, is that using the Bitcoin blockchain to do that level of counting becomes very expensive because you have to pay a Bitcoin fee every time you want to like update your ledger, et cetera. Maybe I'm kind of off in the weeds here, but it's just interesting to me to see. So I feel like BRC20 is like kind of like idiotic and like simple and JSON focused as it is. Like, it's really interesting to see kind of like how my ideas about like, okay, how expensive is it to keep up that kind of ledger? Like every time they make a transaction, they have to make a UTXO. Like it becomes like the fee burden. Is it actually sustainable? Like is running that kind of like extra asset thing sustainable? I feel like I think it's way too early to tell with the BRC20 stuff. It seems like people are still really using it and that's still, driving the UTXO explosion to some extent because now they're keeping track of all these assets using UTXOs as their accounting mechanism. So yeah, I'm just like, at some point, like what happens when all of that stuff becomes uneconomical to continue transacting with? Or do we just end up with all these dead UTXOs no one wants to use? Like, I don't know. So I think there's some really interesting broader questions about like using the Bitcoin blockchain to keep track of other things. Art is one of them, but like, these like, I don't know, whatever BRC20 things are. Yeah, so I'm just like, I'm very curious to see how that plays out.
Follow-up for you guys, for Nifty first. Oh, do you want to respond? Go ahead.
Just a couple things on BRC20. I will admit that I guess I'm identifying myself as a midwit. I minted many of those, including the first 5. And my thoughts on BRC20 are that I've watched people try to trade tokens on Bitcoin, adjacent to Bitcoin, colored coins, counterparty assets, rootstock assets for a really long time, and even taproot assets. And the truth is that nobody really used any of it. BRC20 was announced, I think, around 11 p.m. at night. It allowed anybody to mint these in 1,000 increments. Anybody that put these JSON blurbs into their inscription transaction. And by the next morning, all 21 million of them had been minted out. The most used BRC20 token has 15 million transactions. I mean, we're talking about use that is astronomical, use that we have not seen on our chain. And frankly, the fact that anybody could read it and anybody could create it and anybody could deploy a token, we have thousands of tokens now, it created this crazy ecosystem. And what I will say is they are complete shitcoins. There's like no question about that. Anybody that tells you otherwise is totally grifting you, but that doesn't change the fact that these are shitcoins built directly on Bitcoin without a sidechain, without a token, and it's something that's sort of, I mean, I guess it doesn't really make a difference, but one way that I think about it is it's shitcoins with a bit of a Bitcoin flavor to them, in the sense that the supply can't be changed, that the mints were actually fair and equal. Anybody could mint them. These are really small distinctions, but they matter in my opinion, and it's sort of like the Bitcoin flavor of shitcoinery. And I guess the last thing I would say about it is I don't love shitcoins, but I do recognize the fact that the market likes them, and I would personally prefer to see them contribute to separating money and state by contributing to the fee market on Bitcoin rather than splitting that liquidity out to all these different chains. So that's sort of my view on it.
Really quick follow-up on this question, and I want to not to spend too much time on BRC20s because we've got a lot to get through, but do either of you have an opinion about why BRC20s have become so popular and just outstripped every other possible similar asset that has attempted to do something even remotely like this?
Yeah, and I think that my perspective on that as a non-engineer is that people wanted tokens natively on Bitcoin, and when it became easy for anybody to do it, that was the second it exploded, literally that minute. So all these more complicated technical solutions, they're better. Everybody will admit that they're better, but just nobody wants to use them.
Do you want to comment?
Yeah, as someone who works kind of like in the Bitcoin education protocol space, at least like, you know, semi as a like sort of side project, a little more full time now. You know, people talk a lot about how inaccessible building on Bitcoin is, right? It's like something that I feel like kind of just heard a lot. Is like it's so hard to figure out how to build anything on Bitcoin. It's so much easier to go into the Solana, the Ethereum, the like Cosmos space and like build something there, right? And I don't know if that's like a tooling and education, like you know, like there's a lot of different ways you can kind of look at that. But for whatever reason, I feel like the BRC20 thing was like the right product. Finally like found like product market fit, so to speak, right? It was like the right product that was accessible to the right market at like kind of the right time. And so it just like, you know, the tools to do that sort of thing just sort of like appeared, and there were people that wanted to use it in that way, were able to find it and had access to it, and it just exploded.
I just want to say, from my perspective, I look at this and it is entirely enigmatic to me. I just, to this day, just cannot grasp how the hell or why the hell anybody would possibly want these JSON blobs where when you're looking at them using an inscription explorer, you cannot even tell which one is the first one, because anybody can just create an inscription with the same text content, and so you need a separate protocol besides Ord to just keep track of which one was first. And so it becomes this really, really complicated thing where I think that most people trading them probably don't go through the trouble of verifying their provenance, and I really just cannot grasp it. It eludes me.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so just a very quick point on that, and that's correct. You need another layer of indexer on top of the native Ord indexer to determine the balances of BRC20. The only thing I would say about that is it is such a simple process, though, that anybody could do it by hand if they wanted to. So yes, there are other indexers, and there's a network of those indexers that are coming up that are all agreeing on what these balances should be. But I guess the only point I'd make is that it's so simple that if you wanted to tally it by hand, you could.
So it seems to me that there's been some disagreement among these indexers about which ones come first, and that's been fun to see and introduce. But besides that, no, I don't think I had another thing. That's it.
I actually have a good question for you, Super, on this topic while we're, you know, sort of talking about use cases for ordinals outside of what I think is Casey's intended use case, which is, you know, property rights for digital arts, digital artifacts, collectibles. You had mentioned to me sort of on a separate conversation that you were interested in talking about alternatives to ordinals and inscriptions as far as data storage is concerned. Would you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, but before I do that, I want to mention that I hope that it'll become easier to use some of the alternatives that he mentioned, like Taproot assets. I think RGB is another very promising one. These tools have been very difficult to use, but they are efficient on the chain. And I hope that if we make them easy, you know, if making them easy is just a developer tooling problem, or at least I think it is, So if we make them easy, then maybe there will be a shift to that, a shift over to the things that are both cheaper and more efficient and suddenly easy to use. But as for the data storage thing, I think there are blockchains that are designed to store images, that they have like registered fields in their transaction type for, here's where you put the image. I think storing your images on there would be a really good idea. And then you could just have like a reference to it in an RGB asset or something like that. Another thing you could do is you could actually hold the file on like a thumb drive. Wherever you hold your keys to move that image, you could also store the image there and just have a pointer to it on the chain, or even not on the chain, but in like in a Taproot tweak. So these things would be more efficient places, in my opinion, to store images. I think they'd be more robust. I think they'd be appreciated by the market. And then you could actually use things like BitTorrent or even just like standard email to actually transfer the image and then transfer the pointer using Ordinals. And I think that would be great. That'd be a much more efficient way to do it.
Well, that is great for verifying the absence of data corruption. However, I think in some cases where you may verify that some data either isn't what it pretends to be or has been modified, but you actually still want to have access to the root, but you're experiencing some sort of maybe governmental censorship or a Sybil attack, I do think that there is sometimes value to having the ability of storing the data in its explicit form, and not just a hash or some reference to it on chain. Just like op returns have been valuable, and for some cases, I mean, not really, but in some very rare use cases, like for time stamping, right? They have been nice, and this just allows you to use slightly more than, what was it, 32 bytes that is the op return max?
80.
80 bytes, all right, well, but the point is it's still fairly little, but if you could have something like 500 bytes or 1,000 bytes for some isolated pieces of data, I think that there genuinely is value there.
Can I ask a question? So if somebody wanted to upload something that the governments really didn't want them to upload, do you think it would be as secure on BitTorrent as it would be on the Bitcoin blockchain, as immutable?
So BitTorrent is a file sharing protocol, and I think it's really shown us that it's something the government can't shut down. If I have a file that the government wants to censor and I want to send it to you on BitTorrent, I can.
Like an individual file. Can you have confidence that that individual file will be there?
Yeah, because it's your file. You have a copy of it. So all you're using file transfer protocols for is the delivery portion. It's not like you have to trust that file sharing protocol to actually hold the message on a long-term basis. It's only on there during the transport from point A to point B. Point A has a copy of the file. Point B ends up with a copy of the file. They can both verify it's the same file. So there's no, I don't think censorship is a concern there.
So you would be, and last question, and then I'm done. And you would be comfortable with like WikiLeaks level of data on those networks?
Yeah, for the transport of that kind of file. I think WikiLeaks is probably a great example because the government couldn't stop WikiLeaks. That information is still available. Lots and lots of people have copies of it because they used file sharing networks to distribute copies to many different locations. If you're talking about internet censorship, I think it's been proven time and time again, you don't need a blockchain for that.
I'm going to pivot really quickly and kind of come back to the sort of cultural conversation around ordinals. I first just kind of want to say I think it's sort of indisputable, right, that adoption has really increased as a result of this innovation. And I want to sort of ask each of you, actually, we might go down the list, is this meaningful, and to what extent is it meaningful relative to some of the challenges that we're talking about today? How much does adoption and increased adoption matter? Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've pretty much already touched on that as far as my view on network effects and these types of assets increasing interest and bringing new people into the network. I think it does that for sure.
I think it remains to be seen, depending on whether it is a one-time phenomenon or something that is long-term. Initially, I think just back in February when it just launched, it seemed after a couple of weeks that it was actively dying down. However, it has been more than half a year now, and that seems to still be cooking. So maybe there is truly long-term potential there. It definitely has brought a bunch of people into Bitcoin. Most of them still understand anything about how Bitcoin works and don't also particularly seem to be eager to learn either. However, there definitely have been others who have been discovering the UTXO model as an alternative to like Ethereum's account-based model. People who have been digging deep, people who have been starting to understand. And even Casey's tweet the other day about Taro has generated a lot of interest in people actually starting to learn and look into that as an alternative to storing data explicitly on chain. So I think that there's definitely potential for more people not just coming to Bitcoin, but generally learning about it and understanding it. But I'm not entirely sure whether it's going to last. It's TBD.
When you like grow in any kind of like culture, like group of people, like so at a startup, you start like hiring a bunch of new people, so to speak. It's kind of like a similar situation, right? Like how fast you add new people, who's doing the hiring at the organization, like who you end up picking to join on your team can make a really big difference to like how the culture of that organization grows as it gets bigger, right? So anytime that you have like one kind of core group of people who have a shared set of values, I do a lot of thinking from values, so it's kind of like my like framing for a lot of this stuff lately. And then you start adding in like waves of people who are like coming from different ecosystems, different values, etc. There's always like kind of a period of like figuring out like, are you going to do value transmission? Like, is the core values of this like group that's been in the ecosystem for a long time end up getting permitted, kind of like pushed out into that new that new group of people that have joined, or are they going to like, or are we going to like end up with two totally different cultures inside like this one big organization, so to speak, that is Bitcoin, and we all have like differing values and viewpoints. And so that kind of situation, I think you end up where the protocol becomes the like arena for conflict, right? Because you have different values, and so like the shared object that you're all kind of like interacting over is going to be the protocol, right? So some ways as like a person who's like in some like trying to bring more people into like Bitcoin development, etc., like making sure that like the value transmission happen is like important, such that the protocol doesn't become like a like place of disagreement or where those values start becoming in conflict. I don't know. Also, as like a Bitcoiner who like cares about the protocol and wants like to see the project like continue to have this mindset of long-term thinking, right? I think this is something that really sets Bitcoin and Bitcoiners and Bitcoin protocol developers apart from a lot of the other ecosystem world like protocol designers in other places, is this like really high like valuation of long-term thinking, right? Like, how are these actions that we're taking going to work out in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, right? Like Bitcoin is money. We need it to like be a sound, secure system, which is durable and lasts for the long term, right? And I think that like, for me, like as a Bitcoiner, it's like when these new people come in and start building things, if we don't, as Bitcoiners, don't try and like share that like shared value with all these newcomers and like don't make it our personal responsibility to help people understand why we value the things that we value, like this long-term thinking, etc. I think the protocol is going to become like the like, I don't know, I hate to use the word battlefield, but like the interface of disagreement there. And I think it's important that we try and avoid that as much as possible.
Two things: partially signed Bitcoin transactions and SIG hash flags. For a very long time, Bitcoiners have been telling the Ethereum crowd that you don't need to do all this coordination on chain. You can actually use tools like the things we've made, partially signed Bitcoin transactions, SIG hash flags, to do this in a much more efficient way, communicate off chain, only put the results of the computation on chain. And finally, with Ordinals, they learned it. Like, it was I remember an early memory from the Ordinals space, hanging on the Ordinals Discord. A guy from the Ethereum ecosystem came in, wanted to learn how PSBTs work and how SIG hash flags work. I showed him how, and he wanted to make a marketplace. And I was thinking, I could probably do a marketplace. It'd take me about a week to do it. And I think of myself as a fast developer. The guy learned it that night, and the next morning, he had a marketplace created that used partially signed Bitcoin transactions and SIG hash flags. It's absolutely amazing. These Ethereum guys, absolutely fast development, and they put me to shame. So I was really excited about that. I'm really grateful that Casey made it, even if through a terrible method, he introduced Ethereum people to the idea of off-chain protocol design, and that's wonderful.
One more, just quick thing. And I think it's probably changing because it's so, thanks to work like yours and others, it's easy now to have a Ordinals wallet without a full node. But early on, it was impossible, and I think a ton of nodes got spun up just to be able to inscribe and get involved with Ordinals. And obviously, that's a good thing.
Just want to do a quick time check. Does anyone have the time? Because I don't, and I want to make sure I'm picking my best questions. Oh, man. Okay. All right. Well, so then just really, do you need to run? Yeah. Nifty might run off at any moment, but we're going to just continue until we get kicked off stage because I have a couple other questions that I just want to make sure we touch on. Number one, fungibility and privacy. I think this is like kind of the last really substantive question that we haven't gotten to look at that I think maximalists have questions and concerns about. I'll also leave this popcorn style. Does anyone kind of want to take a shot at their point of view about fungibility and privacy?
Yeah, so I think the issue there is that people are under the impression that Bitcoin is fungible when I personally don't believe that it is, and I understand that's a subjective question. But I mean, if it were, we wouldn't have the concept of like a coin join coin or a non-KYC coin. So I think the idea that it reduces Bitcoin fungibility when it didn't exist in the first place it's kind of a non-argument.
We really try to improve Bitcoin fungibility, partially by deploying subtle privacy enabling or mass privacy tools such as Lightning, where because you have transactions that are settled off-chain, and then when you finally close out your channels, you don't actually know which transactions have happened in the background. That is supposed to improve both privacy and fungibility, but you could argue that Ordinals are making it slightly harder. However, as I was saying earlier, I think that due to the fact that they only affect such a small subset of tracked Satoshis, I don't actually think that they really make any measurable impact on fungibility, which I think that deploying Lightning to more people, making Lightning more secure, making Lightning easier, I think that that is going to have a much stronger, much bigger effect on both fungibility and privacy than Ordinals could ever hope to impede.
I love this angle that like Lightning is the first fungible Bitcoin, and it like kind of is, right? Like it's the first time you're like trading like kind of like UTXO value across like a network of people, and we've like designed a protocol to do that. So yeah, I think Asher makes a great point that on-chain Bitcoin, one Bitcoin is worth a Bitcoin, but the history of the coins is a thing and an object and an attribute of any UTXO and will be forever. There's really no getting rid of that. I don't know. This is like sort of a tangent. Maybe I won't go on it. It's cool. Okay. I'll cut it.
What makes Bitcoin non-fungible is if you can't funge it. Well, here's my Bitcoin. Go ahead, funge it. Try. I dare you. If you can't funge it, it's non-fungible. There we go.
All right, cool. Okay, they're giving us 5 more minutes, which is great. Okay, so I guess, I have sort of 2 last questions. Again, we're going to pivot back to the cultural conversation, but I think that this would be kind of like the elephant in the room if I didn't mention it. Obviously, I think that we can all sort of like agree that there's some sort of like stigma around discussing Ordinals publicly amongst Bitcoin maximalists. Do you think that that is about any of the topics or challenges that we've already discussed, or do you think that there are other reasons why that is the case? Curious to hear your thoughts.
I think it's because some really unsavory characters descended into the ecosystem as a result of Ordinals, and I think that their existence and what they say and how they sound, I think it leaves a terrible taste in a lot of people's mouths.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
I just personally think it's a silly place to put file data, and it's only gonna you can't really make something good if it sucks. So.
Final statements, final comments on that. Okay, I'll leave you alone. Right, well, so then I think the place that we'll probably wrap up here is just sort of asking this broader question. what does the future look like? What does the future of Bitcoin specifically look like in a world where we presume Ordinals continues to grow?
I mean, and I won't even make a subjective different claim than you. It may suck. The thing is that I believe it's going to come back. I think it'll come back with a vengeance. I think I think the volume, inscription volume, is still going strong, even though it's shifted to different uses. And I think eventually, I think it will contribute to the Bitcoin security budget.
I think one of the nice things is about the people, the weird people using inscriptions, is that these are people who are probably having the absolute most fun interacting with Bitcoin and using Bitcoin. And that genuinely is actually a joy to see, because I don't think most of us, when we just make a payment where we use our wallets, I don't think we sense this. We have the sense of elation that the inscription people have when they are trading their monkey JPEGs or GIFs. And so that is one thing that is actually nice. And the other thing is, if we were to assume that inscriptions are here to stay, then of course people are going to want to be able to store not just their inscriptions but also their Bitcoin. And so if at some point it becomes really too expensive to store money on chain, people are going to want to make sure that their Lightning wallets are really secure and super robust. And honestly, I think that today it's still actually something that we as developers are struggling with, simply because Lightning is such a complicated protocol. Something that you can tell simply by the sheer number of feature flags that are present that you have to negotiate. And you don't just have to negotiate the feature flags, you also need to make sure that your software is able to understand any set of valid combinations. And hell, the fact that it's able to verify whether a set of feature flag combinations is valid or not. So if we are able to come to a consensus as to what Lightning is supposed to look like, if we're able to make Lightning simpler to think about, simpler to develop on, if we could activate any prevout and get L2 or LN symmetry, which would be a huge blessing for developers, I think that would make people feel a lot more secure about storing the majority of their balance off-chain, something that admittedly I personally don't feel too comfortable about. I definitely want a solid contingent of my Bitcoin balance to be on-chain.
I think this brings up one of the more interesting, like from my perspective, like kind of meta conversations that we're not really explicitly having, but we're having implicitly with a lot of these protocols, which is data availability, what that's worth, what we're willing to pay for, trade-offs that we make about where our information is stored. Like, if people are willing to pay to make sure that their data is around and available, and you can kind of develop protocols that they call it like client-side validating, where you have data that you need to validate what's in the chain, but where does that data live? Like, these are really interesting questions that I think as we start seeing more like new kind of extra chain asset protocols developing, people wanting to store information in the blockchain, but not all of the data, just like a commitment to the data, like all of these kinds of protocols and questions start building up the kind of this like meta question of like, where's the data? How do we know it's going to stay there forever? What's the durability of the data? What's the durability of the data storage protocol, et cetera? And I think Ordinals is such a great kind of like case study on what that looks like and the value of that kind of like the value of like blockchains as data availability protocols.
The question was, where's the world headed if inscriptions become popular again? And I suppose the answer is, if any of you played the video game Doom, so that's where we're headed. But no, I'm just playing. If we make better alternatives, and make them easy to use, I think development will follow, and so I think Bitcoin will be fine. Bitcoin will be great.
Thank you, guys. That was really fun. I hope you enjoyed it.
Can we do some questions, Isabel?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to do Q&A?
I think there's a few questions from the audience, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
Lisa, can you sit down or you got to go?
Lisa's got to run, but we've got some other panelists up there.
Please, if you
we
have a
don't matter.
question,
Lisa
come here
matters.
to the stage. Yes.
Here we
Marco.
go.
Okay, yeah, you guys can hear me. So I've never made an inscription. I attempted to do it one time. But my question is around something you were asking and Super had an answer to, which was the idea of kind of like archiving a document on chain rather than maybe with one of these file transfer protocols. And I think your wording was, would you consider it as secure using one of those protocols compared to putting it on chain? And my question to you, Super, is you said, oh, well, of course, like for the transfer of the document or whatever, the data, but is there anything that maybe I'm missing or not considering when I think about if you put it on chain, then we can have like a pretty good level of certainty in the availability of that. Whereas if you look at file transfer protocols like BitTorrent, like someone may have that data, they may have saved a WikiLeaks document or whatever, but if no one is seeding that file, you don't have access to it. So do you guys have thoughts on that?
Controversial files tend to be well seeded on the BitTorrent network because a lot of people are interested in keeping a copy of that file available. So if the file is controversial or if lots of people are interested in it, then I don't think there will be any trouble, even if the government tries to censor it. I just don't think they can. It has sort of a Barbra Streisand effect. And if it's like a family document or something that's only of interest to a small number of people, then I think keeping it on like a flash drive that your family has access to and you seed it from Uncle Jim or something like that is a lot smarter of a way to do this. Your own family can keep the things that only your own family is interested in, and the whole world will keep the copies of things that everyone's interested in.
Guys, we only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to have to cut it there and just go to the next question, and then we'll just as quick as we can.
So there was a part of the convo about like this, and it could apply to any secular trend that drives Bitcoin Lightning demand, if it's Ordinals, inscriptions, or something else, but incentivizing Lightning development specifically. So I'm curious if we know of things in Lightning development that Ordinals has already pushed, and then something very curious on whether it's this or something else that could push it is, in the fiat world, a ton of the businesses are based off of SaaS models, and from my loose understanding, we haven't done a lot of great Lightning development to make Lightning, it's hard to do, right, but do Lightning for kind of recurring SaaS payments. I think there's some stuff there, but it's not widespread. So is that something we could see here? I mean, most of the time, I think people just buy the asset or pay a service to do the inscription, maybe sell it on a secondary market, but could this ever drive something like SaaS development in Lightning, like SaaS pricing or other things like that for Lightning?
Well, LND just merged simple Taproot channel support. Dusty, who was in the audience, recently merged his splicing PR. I would argue that there's palpable fire under all of us developers' asses due to this increased fee market that we are experiencing. As far as recurring payments, which is, I believe, what you were asking about, that isn't really something that Bitcoin itself possibly can support because you have to keep creating new signatures. So that is something that has to be opt-in. However, on Lightning, there's the Bolt 12 protocol, and Bolt 12 allows things like generating separate invoices for a static node without explicitly needing to just create new QR codes, for example. And there was one discussion of a modification to Bolt 12 that would allow recurring payments. Obviously, it would require a lot of being opt-in, and it's not something that could happen in the background because you need to be online to create a signature for that, which is what I was referring to with Bitcoin not supporting recurring payments. But in principle, that is something that you could implement on Lightning that even has been discussed, even though I wouldn't really necessarily label it as recurring.
Thank you, Arik. Isabel, I think we're going to wrap there. But
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
big thanks to Isabel and her panel. If you do want to ask them any further questions, and if they're happy to hang around, I think there were a couple more. Thank you. Up next. Up next, we have one of the most incredible developers in the space. they say he does terrible things to bears. I call him the car man. Ben! Hey, dude.
I thought you were on the back today.
Okay. Hello. Yeah. All right, we're going to talk something a little more cool than ordinals. Hopefully something actually useful for the world. But, no, you're good. But yeah, we're going to talk about on-chain privacy for Lightning wallets. Hopefully everyone here is using Lightning. Hopefully everyone here cares about privacy. And we all know on-chain privacy is a hard problem. Lightning privacy is also a hard problem. So talking about, like, in the specific case for Lightning, how we can solve these and all different issues. So yeah, so for our agenda, talk about traditional on-chain privacy. What are the problems? How do we solve it? And then how Lightning kind of breaks all that stuff. And then how we fix it in Lightning, hopefully. So for traditional on-chain privacy, there's some, these are the absolute basics. If you're in here and you don't know these, welcome to Bitcoin. But so obviously hold your own keys. Don't reuse addresses. Don't use a trusted third party to get your balances. Like if you're using like a public Electrum server, they have all your balances and your privacy is meaningless. And lastly, like broadcast your transactions over Tor. If you're broadcasting your transactions to like a trusted third party, they know exactly what you're transacting with, and you lose all your privacy. So these are pretty basics. Normally, like, in the first few months of Bitcoin, you kind of learn this stuff. But, there's some more advanced stuff, like Bitcoin privacy for real. We start learning about things like the common input ownership heuristic, where in a Bitcoin transaction, if you have more than one input, most likely the same person owns all those inputs. So we do things like CoinJoin to break this. There's also a thing called the round amount heuristic, where if I'm sending, say, 1 million sats, it's exactly like 1 million. Normally that's a payment. It's very rare you get like a change output of 1 million sats. So stuff like that. Or they do similar with fiat values as well. Of like they see when the transaction's broadcast and like, oh, that was exactly $25. That was probably a payment, not a change amount. And then importantly, this is like kind of where all Bitcoin privacy boils down to, is just protecting backwards and forwards history. So with Bitcoin, we have this ledger and log of every single transaction that's ever happened. And so that means we need to be able to protect against things in the past. So when I create a transaction, you can't look back in the past and see what it had done previously. And then you need to protect your future. When I have these coins, I want to spend them in the future, I need to make sure that it will be private in the future and that these people can't go back and see what I'm going to do. So like, if I get a payment from someone, I'm not still like protected from them anymore, even if I never interact with them again. They can still see my coins on chain. So I need to be conscious that in the future, that person who I transacted with in the past can't see what I'm doing in the future. So basically the idea is like, we got to protect against this. This is like a screenshot from one of Ergo BTC's tweets where, he was following some hack or something that happened on Bitcoin, and basically it was like, gave an exact log of where all these Bitcoin and sats went across the network. And you can get like a pretty good idea of what's going on here, especially when you start interacting with KYC businesses like exchanges and stuff, where they have known addresses and all that. Then it gets very obvious where things are going, and you can really track down like what this person does. And a lot of times, a lot of people have gone to jail because they messed this up, and they get revealed of, they do some privacy stuff, but then they pause into a KYC exchange, and it gets all invalidated, and they get like prosecuted for a crime. So that's kind of the idea for on-chain privacy, is we want to avoid anything like this of having users be tracked throughout the past or future in their Bitcoin. So there's a lot of tools. The first one that came out in Bitcoin was custodial mixers, but those are there's like a guy being in jail right now for like allegedly running one, and they're not even very good, so don't use those. But kind of the more recent tools that a lot of people use is things like CoinJoin, PayJoin, and CoinSwap. CoinJoin is probably one of the most used today. There's the major implementations, Samurai, Wasabi, and Join Market. They all have like tens of thousands of Bitcoin run through them, and for like reasonable fees, and they provide very good anonymity set. They help with your forward and future privacy. It's just you have to use it the right way. But the problem is it's like a very proactive thing where it's not just like I make a payment and the coin join just happens. It's normally something, I take kind of time out of my day, I go back and, press the coin join button on my wallet and then, do my transacting later. So this isn't really something we're going to have most likely like every person doing just because it's something you need to be conscious of. And most people aren't even conscious of their privacy. So it's hard to make this by default. PayJoin is something that's relatively newer that Dan Gold's been championing a bunch, but this is kind of an alternative to CoinJoin where it is something that just happens automatically, where when I'm making a payment, I basically do a tiny CoinJoin with the recipient, and you're able to actually hide the payment amount and everything like that, and it helps a whole bunch. And the great part is, like I said, it's not like a thing you need to seek out and do. Your wallet will just do it automatically. So it helps a lot in that regard of like not needing to teach users and inform users and like have users that seek out privacy use this. It can be something that just everyone uses. And then finally, CoinSwap. There's no real major implementation of this. Chris Belcher was working on something called teleport transactions, but that ended up, I think he posted about having health problems and stuff, so he hasn't been working on it. But basically the idea of this is like I have a UTXO, Alice has a UTXO, we swap UTXOs, so instead of like mixing all of our histories, we now just swap histories. So if I transacted with someone, they're now going to think my spends in the future or Alice's spends in the future are mine, and Alice's, people think that I'm her. And we basically, if enough people do this, you kind of just interlink everyone together and it gets too confusing. There are some trade-offs here though, where you're not getting this like quantifiable privacy of like an answer that you can't track. You're more just like kind of creating this like unguessable heuristic and stuff like that. But it is an improvement, and a lot of times this is like good enough to like get around authorities that you don't want to have you tracking. Yeah. You might have to turn it on.
Hello? All right. This might seem like heresy to say this or to prose this. There's a lot of Ethereum-based things. The only way to get them is to use it's an exchange swap sort of for a service fee kind of thing. Well, they buried in the rate, right? But still, if you went from Bitcoin to something else and then back to Bitcoin, thoughts about does that solve or improve or leave you still vulnerable? What by doing that would be the privacy implications?
Yeah, so like I think probably what the most major, at least people think that type of people talk about is doing things like like atomic swap into Monero, transact a little bit, atomic swap back into Bitcoin. It can work. The problem is like for one, it's like you're now just inheriting that anon set and privacy properties of that chain you're swapping to, and as well and then you're also now adding timing attacks as a potential issue as well. So like my main problem with that is like Monero doesn't have too many users. Like there's like maybe 100 transactions an hour, so it's like you're not getting that huge anonymity set. You can get a way higher anonymity set just mixing with Samurai or Wasabi. So, but you don't get that amount blinding and stuff like that. But the thing is though, Bitcoin doesn't have the amount blinding, so when you swap back in, it's coming back, and then you're also then adding in the timing analysis of like, if you want to hold Monero for a whole month, to like prevent the timing attacks, you might just lose 20% of your Bitcoin. So it might not be worth it. So it's a hard problem. Maybe something like Liquid can be a better alternative because they have the confidential transactions. Problem is like literally no one uses Liquid, so you're not getting that anon set. So I mean, I guess that'll segue into here. Is Lightning is a good alternative to this. The Lightning actually has pretty great privacy. There's no just global record and broadcast of every transaction. we have this fancy onion routing, so it's hard to track payments. Their senders have pretty good privacy. And we have this thing called blinded pass coming soon. So soon after we have blinded pass, we can pretty much guarantee like Lightning has kind of like Tor-like privacy for payments, where you don't know the sender, you don't know the recipient, you just know that some payment went across the network, and it's pretty hard to track unless you're like literally probing every single one at the same time and tracking balances. And that's not really feasible today at the level without investing significant capital into the network. So at least we're not seeing it yet, as far as we know. But Lightning privacy also kind of sucks. We have these publicly announced channels. You reuse the same public key across payments without things like route blinding. There's a lot of what I'm calling metadata analysis, things like the same payment hash correlated across a payment route. We have like these CLTV deltas that are slowly declining over a payment, so it's easy to tell how far the payment's going. And as well, there's other things like amount analysis, where you can see it's the same amount going across, and fees, so you can't really do stuff like that. But these are fixable, and like I said, some of this is already being fixed, like blinded pass. But this is like the main problem. Like this is a screenshot from a Lightning Explorer, just like here's a node with all their channels. And you can click on them and like, oh look, here's a transaction. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it even says like channel open SpaceX to not Ben the Carman. Like, someone can exactly see like a 0.2 channel going to my node. Like, that's not the best. Like, 0.2 Bitcoin's a fair amount of money. Like, I don't want to have heat on me, but I'm showing you guys this because it's public, and that happens. And like, this isn't just a problem for like individuals; it's a problem for like literally everyone on Lightning. And but we can solve this. So normally it's kind of the people who are like, oh, I don't want to get doxed like that. It's just like, well, just don't run a routing node. And so then now we're on non-custodial mobile Lightning. It's kind of the alternative to running a routing node. So you have things like Mutiny, Phoenix Breeze. These are the four I thought of last night. There were the major implementations. And they also have problems, though. Because basically you kind of go back to like, well, now I'm trusting my LSP with all my privacy. And because, we don't have these announced channels, but my LSP knows it. And, I don't have these, these payment correlation issues can be tamed down, but my LSP knows all the stuff now. So you kind of like, it's almost like a VPN versus Tor, where you're now, instead of having you're globally broadcasting to everyone, just your VPN kind of knows, but you're trusting them. So hopefully as Bitcoiners we're able to pick good LSPs that actually respect our privacy, and we can trust, but we live in an adversarial world and we want to not have to trust people, so we should make things that can fix that. So for Mutiny, we're building something called Redshift to kind of help solve one of these issues. So just a quick intro on Mutiny. We're a self-custodial Lightning wallet, runs in the browser. It's back up. We're working out all the kinks, but we just launched, and we're doing a lot of cool stuff, I think. So it's first of its kind, node in the browser, BDK, LDK, all in Rust, self-custodial. We're trying to do these best practices that prevent things like having to trust your LSP completely with everything. And wide LDK, for one, it's kind of the only thing we could use to run the browser, and we're doing a lot of cutting-edge things like RGS, VSS, async payments that other LDK contributors talked about this week. And it's really customizable for our platform. It's going to enable something like Redshifts, and I'll show you guys how. So Redshifts are kind of a new way to send on-chain or open Lightning channels. It's a Lightning-based coin swap, and it's only really possible with LDK because LDK is such a lightweight implementation. It allows us to create many just little nodes. So the idea is we spin up a new Lightning node. We open a channel to a random Lightning node on the network. Then we spin up another Lightning node that's going to be our main Lightning node. And we send the full balance across the Lightning network. And that's kind of the whole point. So we have this is our Lightning network here. All these are little nodes. We spin up our first node, spin up our second node, and we just send the payment to them. Really basic. And but the point of this here is to hide from our LSP. So we can fund our LSP or fund our wallet without having the LSP see our on-chain UTXO. And that's the real thing, where we can solve this on-chain privacy problem of having to trust our LSP with our on-chain history by just sending it across Lightning. And no, I can't go back. But because of that, we can now, instead of having just this line of trust at our LSP here, we have this like blinded onion path of trust now. So, or not trust, but of privacy and blinding. So it's a lot harder for them to ever find out where our original UTXO came from. Like the only thing that could dox us now is something like seeing like say like a 1 Bitcoin channel open originally, and then I receive 1 Bitcoin here. That's gonna be like really hard to correlate, and you can always just use delays in payments to prevent that. So the only trade-offs here is like we're doing a lot of on-chain transactions now. Opening and closing these channels because takes some more time and more on-chain fees and all that. And the more hops you do, you will have more privacy, but you're paying more routing fees. And Lightning is your routing fees are based on the amount. So if you want to send 10 Bitcoin, it's gonna be really expensive. We're doing only a couple million sats. It's not too bad. But also, the more hops it is, the less reliable. So you could be in a scenario where you try to open a 1 Bitcoin channel. That would have gone fine if you just open the channel straight to the LSP. But if you're trying to do it in a Redshift, you could get stuck payments and it wouldn't make it all the way through. But as Lightning grows and gets more adopted and all this stuff, payment reliability just goes up and up. So hopefully that should solve through number go up and everything. So that's all I have for you guys today, but I hope you guys enjoy it. Should be coming soon to Mutiny, but thank you, and happy to answer questions.
Okay, if you have any question, please come to the stage. I have a question. Like, how you deal with privacy in the closing channel event?
So yeah, closing normally isn't too bad because like when you have a channel closed, if it's an announced channel, you're broadcasting it, and the thing is that it was already announced, so it's like there's no new things. And then if it's an unannounced channel with like your LSP, like you needed that channel anyway, so like there's no real downsides. It's normally like what you do afterwards. So like if you wanted to do something like maybe you close your channel and then you should coin join to like hide from your LSP afterwards and stuff like that. In this case, maybe like you could coin join and then redshift it again to like look like it's a new node, and then just like move it somewhere else. But yeah.
Great, thank you.
You mentioned RGS and VSS with Redshift. Can you just talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, they're not too pertain to Redshift, but yeah, RGS is Rapid Gossip Sync. VSS is Version Secure Storage, I think is what it stands for. But basically, they're like two things that make like Lightning way more doable on a non-custodial wallet and also in a private way. So like traditionally, like at least like what Phoenix does is when it makes a payment, they use Trampoline, so they give it to their LSP and saying, I'm trying to send it to Bitrefill, and then they'll forward the payment to Bitrefill, but then, so that means that async knows every single payment destination you're making, and that's not very private at all. So what RGS does is we have like a super compact version of the entire Lightning graph, and we download that, and then we create the routes ourselves. So our LSP never knows where we're making payments to, and that makes it a lot more reliable and way more private experience. And VSS is just how we do basically channel backups. So like with Mutiny, if you normally with any Lightning wallet, you can't really back up the channel state. You normally just have these static channel backups. With Mutiny, we can transfer it all completely because we just have encrypted cloud storage of your entire Lightning state. And so if you type in your 12 words on any device, it'll pull down your on-chain balance and your Lightning balance. So that allows us to like kind of have a lot more security guarantees. Yeah.
The Redshift flow, could you like go over that again? So the Mutiny wallet spins up 2 nodes. Is that what happens?
Yeah. So with LDK, it's really lightweight to spin up extra nodes, like basically costless. So we can I'll just pull this one. So yeah, like right now with Mutiny, like without redshifts, we just have a single node running that has your channels with the LSP. With redshifts, well, basically in total you have like 3 nodes. You'll have one to create this original, to open this channel, and then one to receive the final payment. And so like after this thing is done, we'll shut down these nodes if you're just closing the channels. If you're using this for payments, we'll keep the Lightning node up. But that's kind of the point, is really just to like obfuscate where this original payment is coming from, so your LSP doesn't see your original UTXO.
Could you talk about how timing attacks could de-anonymize this? So if the blue node opens a channel, makes one payment, and then closes it, the last hop there before the red node can see that channel open and close, do some amount correlation. Can you talk about those attacks?
Yeah, exactly. That's like the main concern here. Of like, say, where the blue node opens for 1 Bitcoin, and then second later, a 1 Bitcoin channel is open to the red node. It's like, okay, if Redshift is well adopted, they can see what's going on here. So there's kind of just two things you could do here. You could do one is just like open this, wait an hour, and then send the payment, and maybe that's good enough. Or but probably the better idea is like, we'll open this first node and first channel, and then do like a random splitting of like into like 5 chunks, and then we could over a day send the payments across. And to be honest, that might just like be a better alternative for reliability as well. So that is stuff we're looking into. Right now we just have the naive version of it working, but as we make this a real product, we'll most likely be doing stuff like that to prevent timing attacks and amount analysis.
If the first channel and the last channel are like, let's say, private Taproot channels, that'll help, I guess.
Yeah. So it'll definitely, like, if these are private Taproot channels, that'll help a lot too, because you're not like explicitly looking like an on-chain thing. The thing is though, like the point of this is to hide from the LSP, and the LSP will know like this last channel. So if you're not trusting them, then they could just be looking on chain for the other UTXO. But it still is like, yeah, if you trust your LSP still, but you're hiding from like chain analysis, then yeah, that'll help.
Did you see as Lightning scale, the government or regulation require KYC for the LSP for the people that open channel?
I really hope not. I mean, I don't think like right now, like regulatorily, like doesn't seem like people are trying to regulate LSPs, because it's like if you do that, you have to regulate every Lightning node, and because of that, there's like, I don't know, it's just like routing payments. You never have custody or anything, so that normally kind of gets you away from all the laws. I mean, I think maybe the most likely way to get regulated now would be like if you're something like doing like trampoline payments, where you have all these, where your users are sending payments to, because then you could like have that risk of like, oh, you leaked that, and now it's like a bunch of user data, or as well, you could get subpoenaed and be forced to give it up. But we haven't seen anything yet, and I don't like, Lightning's so small right now, I don't think it's happening anytime soon, but I don't know, we'll see.
Any more questions? Okay, Ray.
All right, thank you.
And the karma.